This phrase changed my life forever. I never thought such simple words could reveal such a horrifying truth that would destroy everything I believed in. It all started on a Monday morning when Sidney was packing her suitcase for what she claimed was a business trip to Chicago. We'd been married for 9 years and I, Mark, had always driven her to the airport. Always. It was our tradition, something we'd done dozens of times before. But this time she said something that froze the blood in my veins and made every alarm bell in my head start ringing. "Don't worry about driving me, honey. A taxi will be more convenient." Something in her voice, something in the way she avoided eye contact, made me suspicious. In 9 years of marriage, I had learned every one of her intonations, every gesture, every tell. And this one was new. And terrifying. I work as a mechanic at a local auto shop, and over the years of working with machines, I've developed a sense for details. When something isn't working the way it should, you feel it in your gut. And right now, something was working very, very wrong. After Sidney left for work, I couldn't concentrate on engine repairs. All day that phrase haunted me. Why suddenly was a taxi more convenient? Why didn't she want me to drive her? In all our years together, she had never once refused my offer to drive her anywhere, especially to the airport. The more I thought about it, the more wrong it felt. Sidney was a creature of habit just like me. She liked routines, predictability. The sudden change in behavior was like a warning light on a dashboard. You ignore it at your own peril. That evening I called my friend Tyler. Tyler owns a small private investigation agency, but most importantly, he has an inconspicuous gray Honda, perfect for surveillance. We'd been friends since high school and he was one of the few people I could trust with something like this. "Tyler, I need a favor," I told him over the phone. "Tomorrow morning, park across the street from our house. And be ready for some fast driving." "What's going on, Mark?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "I think my wife is cheating on me," I said, the words feeling strange and bitter in my mouth. "I need to know for sure." Tyler didn't ask any more questions. That's what I liked about him. He understood when to probe and when to just be there for a friend. The morning came too slowly. I pretended to be asleep when Sidney was getting ready. She moved quietly, almost stealthily, like she was trying not to wake me. But I was already awake, had been for hours, staring at the ceiling and dreading what I might discover. There was something in her behavior that confirmed my worst suspicions. The way she checked her phone constantly, the way she seemed nervous, excited even. This wasn't the behavior of someone going on a boring business trip. When she pulled out of our driveway in her white BMW, I saw Tyler's gray Honda across the street. Quickly jumping out of the house, I leaped into his car, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "Follow the white BMW," I said, pointing to Sidney's car as it turned onto Main Street. "Are you sure about this, Mark?" Tyler asked as he started the engine. "Sometimes it's better not to know." "I have to know," I replied, my jaw set with determination. I can't live with this uncertainty anymore. But what happened next exceeded my worst expectations. Instead of turning toward the airport, Sidney drove in the opposite direction. Toward the suburban Pine Valley Resort, a place we'd driven past hundreds of times but never visited. My stomach clenched into a knot, but the worst was yet to come. We parked at a safe distance and watched. Sidney got out of her car, but she wasn't alone. From the passenger seat stepped out a man. Tall, in an expensive suit, someone who clearly took care of himself. And I knew him. It was Richard, a partner at the law firm where Sidney worked. The same Richard she always described as just a colleague, and very professional. The same Richard who had been to our house for dinner parties, who had shaken my hand and looked me in the eye while apparently planning to steal my wife. They weren't hugging like colleagues. They weren't kissing like friends. They were embracing like lovers, like people who had been intimate for a long time. But this was only the beginning of my discoveries. Tyler had a camera with a good zoom and we took several photos. The images were crystal clear, there was no ambiguity, no room for doubt. My wife of 9 years was having an affair and she was having it with someone I knew, someone I had trusted. Then I asked Tyler to drive closer to the hotel. I needed to know more. I needed to understand the scope of this betrayal. At the reception desk, I presented myself as a private investigator. Technically it was true since Tyler was with me, and showed photos of Sidney and Richard to the staff. The clerk, a young girl named Ashley, initially hesitated, but when I said it was an insurance matter, she opened up. "Oh yes, they're regular guests here. Every week for 2 days. They always book the luxury suite number 7. Such a loving couple," she said with a smile that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "Every week. 2 days. Luxury suite number 7. My 9-year marriage had turned into a one-man theater where I was playing the role of the naive fool, and apparently, I'd been giving Oscar-worthy performances without even knowing it. But the most painful discovery was waiting for me at home. Returning home, I began searching for evidence. In the drawer of her desk, I found a folder with documents. Not just love letters or photographs. This was something much worse, much more calculated. Inheritance documents. Life insurance policies. And the most terrifying thing, a draft will where Sidney left all our property not to me but to Richard. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was planning my future without me. Or even more terrifyingly, planning a future without my future at all. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just an affair. This was a plan. A carefully orchestrated plan to remove me from the picture entirely. The next 2 hours I spent photographing all the documents with my phone, making sure I had copies of everything. Each document was another nail in the coffin of our marriage, another piece of evidence of how thoroughly I had been deceived. Then I did something that changed everything. Instead of confrontation, instead of a dramatic scene, I decided to play their game but by my rules. I was going to be smarter than they were. I was going to make them pay for what they had done, but I was going to do it the right way. I knew Sidney would return the next day from Chicago, with stories about boring meetings and hard work. And I was ready for this performance. I was ready to be the best actor she had ever seen. When she returned, I met her with flowers and a smile, playing the part of the loving, trusting husband. "How was the trip, honey?" "Oh, those corporate meetings are so exhausting. But I'm glad to be home," she replied, kissing me on the cheek. Every word she spoke was a lie. Every kiss was a betrayal. But I played my role perfectly, and she had no idea that I knew everything. But I was playing my part too. For the next 2 weeks, I was the perfect husband. I brought her coffee in bed, gave her gifts, planned romantic dinners. I was so attentive and loving that she probably wondered what had gotten into me. And meanwhile, I was preparing my revenge. The first thing I did was transfer all our joint funds to my separate account. Legally, this was possible since I was a co-owner of all our accounts. I did it gradually in small amounts so as not to raise suspicions. The second thing, I quietly sold the stocks we had bought together over the years. Everything I did gradually so as not to cause suspicion. Each transaction was carefully timed and documented. The third thing, I hired a real private investigator. Not a friend with a camera, but a licensed professional who could provide evidence suitable for court. Someone who knew the law and knew how to gather evidence that would hold up under scrutiny. But most importantly, I learned something about Richard that Sidney didn't know. It turned out that my rival was married. And not just married, he had a wife and 2 small children. A wife named Patricia who had no idea about his business trips. A woman who trusted him just as much as I had trusted Sidney. And that's when I realized how to make my revenge truly nuclear. I spent days researching Richard's life, learning everything I could about his family, his work, his routines. I discovered that he and Patricia had been married for 12 years, that they had 2 children, a boy and a girl, ages 8 and 6. I found their social media accounts, saw photos of their family vacations, their happy moments together. Patricia looked like a good woman, a devoted mother, someone who deserved better than what her husband was giving her. Just like I deserved better than what my wife was giving me. On Friday morning, when Sidney was getting ready for another business trip, I said to her, "Honey, what if we went somewhere together this weekend? It's been a long time since we spent time alone together." She hesitated. I could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out how to get out of this without arousing suspicion. "Oh, Mark, I'd love to, but this trip is very important. Maybe next time?" "Of course, honey. I understand." But actually, I understood much more than she thought I did. On Saturday, while Sidney and Richard were enjoying their affair in luxury suite number 7, I made a phone call that would change all of our lives forever. "Hello, Patricia? You don't know me, but I need to talk to you about your husband Richard." The meeting with Patricia was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. This woman, mother of 2 children, learned the truth about her husband just as painfully as I had learned about my wife. But she was stronger than I expected and angrier than I had anticipated. Unlike me, she chose immediate confrontation. She wanted justice and she wanted it now. On Sunday morning, when Sidney and Richard were having breakfast at the hotel restaurant, their romantic breakfast was interrupted by Patricia. She brought with her a photographer and 2 witnesses, her sister and her lawyer. The scandal was epic. Patricia didn't hesitate to express everything she thought about her cheating husband and his mistress. The photographs were flying around social media within hours. The hotel staff, other guests, everyone was witness to the destruction of 2 marriages in one dramatic moment. And I was at home at the time, sitting with my phone, waiting for Sidney's call. I knew it would come, and I knew exactly what I would say when it did. The call came at 3 in the afternoon. "Mark, this is all not what you think," she was crying into the phone. "And what do I think, Sidney? Someone did this on purpose. Someone knew where we would be and brought his wife there." "His wife?" Pause. A long, eloquent pause that said more than any confession could have. "Mark, I can explain everything." "I think you've already explained everything. 9 years of explanations. Every business trip. Every late work day. Every don't drive me to the airport." When Sidney returned home, she found me in the living room with a folder of documents on the table. I had been preparing for this moment for weeks and I was ready. Before I continue, please pause the video and subscribe to the channel. I know that not everyone likes all videos, so I try to publish a variety of stories for different age groups and preferences so that no one is left out. I also read all your comments to better understand your preferences, so don't hesitate to write comments. It helps to improve the content. You can write, "I am 65 and I like nuclear revenge," or "pro-revenge where a woman cheats," or something else. I will be very grateful for that. Thank you in advance for your time. I will continue the story. "Divorce papers are already filed," I said calmly. "The lawyer said that with such evidence, the process will be quick." She tried to cry, to beg, to promise that everything would change. She tried to tell me that Richard meant nothing to her, that it was all a mistake, that she loved me and only me. But the lies were too little, too late. But the most interesting thing wasn't her reaction to me. The most interesting thing was what happened to Richard. Patricia filed for divorce and demanded half of all assets, including his share in the law firm. And the senior partners of the firm, learning about the scandal, suggested that he leave of his own volition. Apparently, having your personal life become a public spectacle wasn't good for the firm's reputation. Within a month, Richard had lost his job, half his assets, and as it turned out later, had no intention of marrying Sidney. For him, she was just entertainment, a way to have fun while maintaining his respectable family life. Sidney was left without a lover, without a husband, and with a reputation destroyed throughout the city's legal community. The photographs from the hotel had been seen by everyone, colleagues, friends, family members. There was no hiding from what had happened, no way to pretend it was all a misunderstanding. And me? I got the house, the car, most of our savings, which I had managed to transfer, and most importantly, freedom from 9 years of lies. But the divorce proceedings revealed even more shocking details about the extent of Sidney's deception. During the discovery process, my lawyer uncovered bank records showing that Sidney had been siphoning money from our joint accounts for over 2 years. Small amounts, carefully hidden among legitimate expenses, but adding up to tens of thousands of dollars. Money that had been going to fund her affair, expensive hotels, gifts for Richard, even a weekend trip to Vegas that she had claimed was a work conference. We also discovered that she had taken out a life insurance policy on me without my knowledge, with herself as the beneficiary. When confronted about this, she claimed it was for financial security, but given everything else we had learned, it felt much more sinister. The will that I had found in her desk wasn't just a draft, it was one of 3 versions she had prepared. The other 2 were even more generous to Richard, leaving him not just our assets but also money from my life insurance policy. My lawyer called it one of the most calculated cases of marital deception he had ever seen. Sidney hadn't just been having an affair, she had been systematically planning to replace me in her life, both emotionally and financially. The divorce was finalized in 3 months. Sidney tried to challenge the asset division, but the evidence of her betrayal and her plans regarding the will worked against her. The judge was particularly unimpressed with the life insurance policy she had taken out without my consent. During the final hearing, Sidney's lawyer tried to argue that she deserved half of everything because she had been a faithful wife for most of our marriage. My lawyer's response was devastating. He presented a timeline showing that the affair had been going on for at least 3 years, possibly longer, and that the financial deception had been happening even before that. The judge awarded me the house, both cars, and 70% of our joint assets. Sidney got her personal belongings, her own car, and enough money to start over, but not enough to live the lifestyle she had become accustomed to. After the divorce was finalized, I learned more about what had happened to Richard and Patricia. Their divorce had been even messier than mine. Richard had tried to hide assets, claiming he had less money than he actually did. But Patricia's lawyer was thorough, and they found everything, including the money he had spent on Sidney over the years. Patricia got half of everything, including forcing the sale of their family home. Richard's children, who had been told their parents were separating because sometimes adults grow apart, eventually learned the real reason when they were older. They cut contact with their father entirely. Richard ended up working for a small firm in another state, making a fraction of what he used to earn. His reputation in the legal community was destroyed, and he was essentially blacklisted from the major firms in our area. But perhaps the most satisfying part of my revenge wasn't what happened to them, it was what happened to me. 3 months after the divorce was final, I used some of the money from our assets to buy a small auto repair shop. It was something I had always dreamed of doing but never had the capital for. Within a year it was profitable. Within 2 years I had hired 3 employees and was considering opening a second location. I also started dating again, something I thought I would never be ready for. I met Sarah at a local coffee shop. She was a teacher, divorced with a teenage daughter. She was honest, kind, and most importantly, she never made me feel like I needed to doubt my own instincts. We took things slowly, both of us having been burned by previous relationships. But gradually I learned to trust again. Not blindly, the way I had trusted Sidney, but with the wisdom that comes from experience. Sarah knew about my divorce, about Sidney's betrayal, but she never made me feel like damaged goods. She understood that I needed time to heal, to learn to trust again. And slowly, carefully, I did. A year after I met Sarah, she moved in with me. 6 months later, I proposed. Our wedding was small, intimate, just family and close friends. Tyler was my best man, and in his speech he joked about how he had helped me discover the truth about Sidney, but also how he had watched me rebuild my life into something better than it had ever been. Sarah's daughter, Emma, was 16 when we got married. She had been skeptical of me at first, understandably so, given that her own father had left when she was young. But over time we developed a strong relationship. I was never trying to replace her father, but I was there for her in ways he hadn't been. 2 years after Sarah and I married, we had a son together. Little Jake was born healthy and perfect, and holding him in my arms for the first time, I realized that I had never been truly happy during my marriage to Sidney. I had been content, comfortable, but not happy. Now I was happy. Now I had a family that was built on honesty, trust, and genuine love. But the story doesn't end there. About 18 months after our son was born, I received an unexpected phone call that brought the whole Sidney situation back into focus. It was Tyler, my friend who had helped me discover the truth about Sidney's affair. He sounded excited and slightly amused. "Mark, you're not going to believe this," he said. "Remember that private investigator I recommended during your divorce? Well, he just called me with some interesting news about your ex-wife." It turned out that Sidney had been struggling more than I had realized. After our divorce, she had taken the job at the small law firm, but her reputation had followed her. Word travels fast in the legal community and everyone knew about the hotel scandal. Clients didn't trust her, colleagues kept their distance, and she was basically persona non grata in professional circles. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was that she had apparently learned nothing from her experience with me. She had started seeing a married man again. This time it was her boss at the small law firm, a man named David who had been married for 15 years and had 3 teenage children. And just like with Richard, she thought she was being clever and discreet. But David's wife, Linda, was smarter than Sidney gave her credit for. Linda had hired the same private investigator that I had used, and they had been gathering evidence for months. "The really crazy part," Tyler continued, "is that Sidney was apparently telling people that she had learned from her mistakes, that she would never get involved with a married man again. But here she was, doing exactly the same thing." I couldn't help but laugh. It was almost poetic justice that Sidney would repeat the same pattern that had destroyed her marriage to me. Some people never learn, and apparently Sidney was one of them. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that David's wife had confronted Sidney at her workplace, in front of all her colleagues and clients. The scene was apparently even more dramatic than Patricia's confrontation at the hotel had been. David was fired immediately, his marriage ended in a messy divorce, and Sidney lost her job. This time there was no sympathy for her from anyone. People in the legal community started calling her the homewrecker and the Black Widow. She couldn't get a job at any respectable firm in a 3-state radius. I heard she eventually moved to California, trying to start over somewhere where people didn't know her history. But in the age of social media and Google searches, running from your reputation is nearly impossible. Meanwhile, my own life continued to flourish. My auto repair business was thriving, and I had opened that second location I had been considering. Sarah had been promoted to assistant principal at her school, and Emma was thriving in college, studying to become an engineer. Little Jake was walking now, saying his first words, and bringing joy to our lives every single day. He had Sarah's eyes but my stubborn streak, a combination that promised to keep us on our toes for years to come. One evening, as I was tucking Jake into his crib, Sarah came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if Sidney had never cheated? She asked quietly. I thought about it for a moment. You know, I said, I used to wonder about that. But honestly, I think I would have been miserable. I would have stayed married to someone who didn't really love me, who was just using me. I would never have met you, never had Jake, never built this business. Sidney's betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it didn't feel that way at the time. Sarah smiled and kissed my cheek. I'm glad she was stupid enough to throw you away. Her loss was definitely my gain. That night, as I lay in bed listening to Sarah's gentle breathing beside me, I thought about how different my life had become. 5 years ago, I had been married to a woman who was systematically deceiving me, stealing from me, and planning to replace me. Now I was married to a woman who loved me unconditionally, supported my dreams, and built a life with me based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I thought about Sidney, probably alone somewhere in California, maybe working at another small firm, maybe struggling to rebuild her reputation once again. I wondered if she ever thought about what she had thrown away, if she ever regretted the choices she had made. But mostly I felt grateful. Grateful for Tyler's friendship and help when I needed it most. Grateful for the private investigator who had helped me gather the evidence I needed. Grateful for Patricia's courage in confronting Richard and Sidney, which had given me the opening I needed for my own confrontation. And most of all, grateful for that Monday morning when Sidney said, "Don't drive me to the airport." Without those words, without that moment of suspicion, I might still be living a lie. I might still be married to someone who didn't love me, someone who was planning to betray me in the worst possible way. Instead, I was living the life I was meant to live, with the woman I was meant to be with, raising the children I was meant to raise. The last time I saw Sidney was at a grocery store about 6 months ago. She had gotten a job at a small law firm in a neighboring town, and she looked tired and older than her years. When our eyes met, she looked down and quickly walked away. I felt sorry for her in a way. Not sorry enough to regret what I had done, but sorry that she had made the choices she had made. Sorry that she had thrown away something real for something that was ultimately meaningless. But mostly I felt grateful. Grateful that I had trusted my instincts that Monday morning when she said, "Don't drive me to the airport." Grateful that I had found the courage to investigate, to gather evidence, to protect myself. And grateful that I had learned the most important lesson of my life. When someone you love starts acting differently, when your gut tells you something is wrong, when they say things that don't make sense, trust yourself. Don't ignore the warning signs. Don't make excuses for behavior that doesn't make sense. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the 9 years I spent with Sidney, if I feel like I wasted nearly a decade of my life. And I tell them no. Those years taught me valuable lessons about trust, about love, about the importance of paying attention to the people in your life. They also taught me how to recognize the signs of deception, how to trust my instincts, and how to protect myself when necessary. But most importantly, they taught me that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you can also be the best thing. Sidney's betrayal destroyed my marriage, but it also freed me to find real love, real happiness, real trust. When your wife says, "Don't drive me to the airport," it might be the worst sign you can hear. But it might also be the sign that saves your life. My name is Mark, and this is the story of how my wife's affair led to the best revenge I could have asked for, a life better than I ever imagined possible.